Welcome everybody to my very first Cobra Kai analysis video. With Season 5 coming out after the crazy events at the end of Season 4, a lot of people have been saying that Daniel LaRusso was saved this season, or that Daniel LaRusso is still a major douchebag. And while I think when watching the original Karate Kid films, you could make the argument that Daniel wasn't quite the tragic teen we all thought he was still a good kid nonetheless. The reason I bring this up is because there seems to be a huge argument that Daniel LaRusso was ruined in Cobra Kai or that his character has changed. First off, yes, his character has changed, because in the film he was a teenager, while in Season 1 he was close to 50 years old. If you acted like you were when you were 18 at this stage of your life, I think that's a big enough problem on its own. I'm making this video because there's a popular thread going around the Cobra Kai Twitter sphere that I wanted to discuss and argue. Now, before I do this, just know that this is my opinion and also this is their opinion. There's no bad intentions from this video. I just want an open discussion about the whole thing. They started their argument by saying that Daniel would not prolong a high school feud that he grew beyond many years before. Now, to debunk this whole thing, Daniel started off the show very much putting the past behind him by how he interacted with Johnny. He knew after the events of the first movie that Kreese was more of a douchebag than Johnny ever was with him, witnessing Kreese choke Johnny after losing the tournament and being the victim of the ridiculous scheme in Karate Kid 3. Of these two characters, Johnny is the one who can't seem to let go of the past, with him getting upset that there's another LaRusso auto dealership opening, and just the sight of Daniel on his TV causes him to throw a liquor bottle at it. What causes Daniel to go off the rails was him noticing a Cobra Kai dojo, and at first he actually was totally fine with it. He may have gotten some bad memories seeing the name Cobra Kai, but he moves past from it. What actually sets him off is hearing Kyler's story about how Johnny beat him and his friends up. He puts the two together and doesn't want Johnny to become as crazy as Kreese was and teach the kids the same lessons that made Johnny and his friends such douchebags. I think you'd react the same way if you heard that the guy who assaulted a bunch of kids opened up a karate dojo. Now, Kyler isn't telling the entire story, but regardless, it is assault. It is a bit hypocritical of Daniel because Mr. Miyagi did the exact same thing, but at this point in time, he doesn't think Kyler is like the kids from Cobra Kai who bullied him all those years ago, and all he hears is that an adult assaulted a bunch of kids. They then go on and say that he would not exploit the sacred art his father figure taught him to sell cars. You have to remember that Miyagi died in 2011, and when the dealership opened, Sam wasn't even born yet, so this would have taken place in early to mid 2002. With Miyagi still being alive, he probably got his permission to use it as his trademark. And even if he didn't and he started using it after Miyagi died, he probably did it to honor him, not exploit him. They then go on and say that he would not lose his temper on a teen he had been mentoring and tell the teen to get lost just because that teen made a couple of mistakes. With Robbie, there are two mistakes that he made that got Daniel heated, one which was an overreaction, but the other was honestly a reasonable reaction. The first time was him getting angry at Robbie for not telling him that Johnny was his father. What makes me somewhat understand why Daniel was so angry was that Robbie said, "I was gonna tell you," right before Daniel got mad. Had Robbie said that he didn't know there was bad blood between them, I don't think Daniel would have gotten so mad. As for the second time, Robbie took Sam to Johnny's house and didn't tell Daniel what had happened. If you were a parent and another teenager took your kid to a stranger's house without them knowing, I'm sure you'd get pretty upset too. They then say that he would not act like a rich, condescending snob as he frequently does towards Johnny. Daniel is a humble working-class kid at heart, and he's the kind of person who stays true to his roots. Again, it has been over 30 years, and when you gain wealth when you had none for so long, it can definitely change you. Before this scene at Miyagi's grave, Daniel was acting like a snobby rich person because, again, money can change people. Just compare Johnny to the films and Johnny now. The money in one's life slowly becomes a person's character trait, whether we like it or not. The thing that may have kept Daniel true to himself all this time was Mr. Miyagi's presence, but with his passing in 2011, that left him without that father figure in his life guiding him. After this scene though, Daniel slowly stops being the rich asshole and becomes more true to himself, but sometimes the rich person in him comes out.
Can't believe you eat that crap.
Oh, what? You too good for gas station food?
Yeah, I am.
Again, it's very natural when you become very wealthy after struggling for most of your young adult life. Plus, you have children who have lived in this very privileged and wealthy lifestyle their entire life, so you're constantly reminded of it on a daily basis. They then say that Daniel would not be so heavily involved in the tournament scene. His and Mr. Miyagi's karate was far more meaningful than tournaments and trophies, something Daniel learned in the third film. Again, so much time has passed, and maybe Mr. Miyagi was fine with Daniel being involved in the tournament, especially since Miyagi-Do was never competing and Daniel was just on the All Valley board. Things do change when Daniel finally finds someone he can entrust with passing down what he learned from Mr. Miyagi, especially after Sam quit karate, presumably because of Mr. Miyagi's death. But you also have to keep in mind that Robbie and Daniel never had an All-Valley tournament in mind when Daniel was training Robbie, but when Robbie came in unaffiliated, he decided that it was time to bring back Miyagi-Do in the All-Valley tournament. Daniel also learns something in the third film that he realizes in season 4, but in reality he learned some of it in season 1.
Just like bonsai, choose one way grow because root strong. You choose one way do karate, same reason.
Yeah, but I do it your way.
Hey, one day you do one way.
Daniel will teach Miyagi-Do his own way. And maybe a part of that would be training a student to compete in the All Valley. Daniel isn't the only one who teaches a slightly altered version of Miyagi-Do. As we see in the movies, Mr. Miyagi himself actually taught Daniel his own version of Miyagi-Do by keeping the secret pressure point technique away from him because it wasn't the way he wanted to teach the lessons. Just because Daniel decided over 30 years later to become active in the tournament scene with Miyagi-Do doesn't mean he was just throwing away what he learned in the third movie. It seemed that the whole point of this tweet was that they were upset that the creators tried to make Johnny the good guy and make Daniel out to be the bad guy. What I thought the whole point of the show was actually flipping the script and showing that there's two sides to the story. That whole idea was shown to us more clearly when Johnny describes the event of the first film to Miguel, and when Daniel does the exact same thing 2 seasons later. Just because Daniel changed doesn't mean that it was throwing away what Daniel learned in the movies. Daniel was a teenager, and in the show he's nearly 50. You better expect some things to change. And by throwing in lots of money and a lifestyle that he was never used to, things with him are very different because his circumstances are extremely different. If you were someone who lived in poverty for probably the first 25 years of your life, but you were a millionaire by the age of 50, I'm pretty sure you'd change as a person. Sure, you might have some perspective of where your roots are, but you're still going to see a change in character. Their tweet comes from the perspective of a huge Karate Kid fan who idolized Daniel LaRusso for over 35 years, and that's something I might not fully understand, because growing up, while I liked the Karate Kid, I didn't think it was on the same level as Rocky, and honestly thought it was just an okay film. It was Cobra Kai that got me more invested in the movies and eventually grew me to really like them, even the third movie to a very small extent.
Hey, I like that! Oh, I like that, Johnny! I'm gonna use that!
And also, me and many others in the Cobra Kai fanbase might have a completely different take on Daniel, since we didn't have the Daniel LaRusso of the 80s etched in our brains for 30 plus years to go off of. I think the moral of the story and the whole point of this video is that you aren't the same person as you were all those years ago, and Daniel LaRusso is just like everybody else. Because if he was the same person, that would be pretty fucking scary.